Melochim Perak Hey Halacha Hey. Mitzvah say la'abed zecha Amalek. There's another positive commandment to destroy Amalek. Shanama says Timka zecha Amalek. You shall destroy the memory of Amalek. V'chein. The Rambam here in Halacha Hey tells us that just like there's a positive commandment to destroy the seven nations, so there's a positive commandment to destroy the nation of Amalek, as it says, Timcha Zecha Amalek in Dvorim 25:19. Moetzes say this and it's an obligation, a positive commandment to remember continuously his evil deeds, and his entrapment. Kidei la'oire evosoi, in order to arouse within the person the hatred for Amalek. Shanama that says, remember that which Amalek did to you. We learned from generation to generation. Remember is an obligation, but to remember verbally so. To not forget is something that refers to hatred in the heart. Now, these three mitzvahs in the beginning of Hilchos Melochim are mentioned among the 23 mitzvahs as the 8th mitzvah to destroy the seed, the 9th to remember what he did to us, and the 10th not to forget his evil designs and his evil remains that he left. In Perak Aleph, in the first chapter, we said these three mitzvahs. There are three mitzvahs when we come in. The king is obligated when we came into Eretz Yisrael. That Jewish people were obligated when we came into Eretz Yisrael to appoint a king to destroy Amalek and to build a Beis Hamikdash. In Perak 6 Halacha Daled, we had the law. We had the laws that applied to destroying Amalek. In Perak Hey Halacha Aleph, it tells us that the king has to wage the obligatory commandment wars, which are the seven nations, and that of destroying Amalek. And here we're discussing the difference between them, those wars, to other wars in Perak 6 Halacha Daled. That's what we also mentioned. Now, in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, in the mitzvah 188, the Rambam writes, he commanded us to destroy the entire seed of Amalek, as opposed to the seed of all of Esav, because according to the Rambam, the seed of Esav is not included in the mitzvah to destroy Amalek. On the posting in Bereshis, Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, the son of Esav, and she gave birth to Eliphaz Amalek. The Rambam writes, and we are commanded, the children of Esav, not to destroy them. It says, like Tatav Adoimi. So Esav is excluded from this obligation of destruction, and we can't even take their land. It's also forbidden to take the land of Edom, which is the seed of Esav, because the Torah says in Dvorim 2, passage 5, Mihem b'nei Edom, and that's where it's mentioned you can't take them. And who are the children of Edom? All of those that know are living in Seir, but Amalek, the son of the concubine, is not considered part of Esau, and we have to hate him and destroy his name. Rambam, Maimonides, at the end of Sefer HaMitzvahs, explains that we can't take from Edom their land, and you should not hate Edom. Till when is that so? And in the Torah he writes why Amalek was punished more so from any other nation that fought against us, because after it says in the shiur, the song we sang after we crossed the Red Sea, all the nations heard your anger and they were fearful, and even the leaders of Edom, the leaders of Moab, were trembled in fear, and all those who dwelt in Canaan melted before your awesome might. That happened. Then Amalek came along and showed that you could wage war against basically God, against Hashem. Meaning, if you wage war against Israel, and recognize that Hashem showed His powers, then you're showing you can wage war. And they were lo yorei elikim. They called the people that didn't fear God. Therefore, they received this punishment. And the Rambam writes this as well. We are committed to destroy the seed of Amalek, except this excludes the other seed of Esau. Sefer HaMitzvahs, part of Commandment 188, he explains to destroy them. That means both males and females, minors and adults. That we find by Shmuel, when Shaul was told to wage war against them and to destroy them, it says there the commandment was from men to women, from infant to all ages, and he adds, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, destroy them. That these three mitzvahs were commanded as we entered Eretz Yisrael, to have a king, and to build the Beis HaMikdash and destroy the seed of Amalek. And this is one of the wars of mitzvah. Now, what does it mean you have to remember their deeds? In Sefer HaMitzvahs he writes what Amalek did to be the first to do us evil. And we should remind ourselves of this at all times. We should awaken to wage war against him and to hate him until it will not be forgotten, that this mitzvah will not be weakened. And it says, over time, things become weaker in a person. Therefore, one has to awaken it both by mouth and to remember in the heart. We learned throughout the ages, the Chazal told us, and we find this in the Sifri on Dvorim 25:17. Remember what Amalek did to you with mouth. Do not forget that which he did in your hearts. And that's to make sure that we continue to have this hatred. In the Sifro, in the Torah Kahana, which is in Vayikra, it's written, I might think only in your heart, but it says, do not forget. That's the heart. What does it mean? Remember, you have to say it with your mouth. Sefer HaMitzvahs, he adds, see that Shmuel HaNavi, when he began to fulfill this mitzvah, he told Shaul how to do so. He remembered first of all the evil deeds of Amalek, and then he told him to destroy them. As it says in Shmuel, I remember that which Amalek did to Yisrael when he came out of Egypt. From Shmuel, Rambam took the language to remember his evil deeds and that which he plotted. As we find in the Targum Yonason, that he set up a trap for them. L'sishkach, do not forget, the Rambam accounts in Mitzvahs, Negative Commandment 59. We should not forget what the seed of Amalek did to us to damage us. And we explained to renew his hatred. And so we are told, warned, and we push it out of our heart. And it says, do not forget. We read from the Sifri, remember with your mouth, do not forget in your heart. But the remembering of the negative command, do not forget, do not throw out his anger, and do not take it away from your soul. Who is this obligation on? The early commentaries disagree Whose obligations? Is it the kings or the populace or every individual? The Rambam writes, when we look at these mitzvahs that we have to remember, you'll find some of them that are obligation on the community, not on the individual, such as building the base of Mikdash, and establishing a king and destroying Amalek. So we see it's an obligation of the community. The Shiurim writes that it's a mitzvah on the king to do so. And so the Rambam writes, every Jewish king is obligated to wage war until they're destroyed. But according to the Chinuch, the mitzvah is also on every single individual. According to the Rambam, the mitzvah is on the populace. That's why he states in Halacha Daled to destroy the 7 nations, and everyone who comes into your hand, you didn't destroy him, he transgresses. However, when it comes to destroy Amalek, he doesn't mention the individuals that you transgress, because he's of the opinion that destruction of Amalek is only on the populace, on the entirety, as opposed to the individual. Even though the Rambam writes that the mitzvah is on the congregation, on everyone, not sing individually, he mentions that Machon Nesher HaGodol is a Machon mitzvah, that the king is obligated to wage war. And that, what he writes, the establishment of the king, it precedes the obligation of destroying Amalek. It would seem that the mitzvah is on the king to wage war. Mosdos explains that according to the Rambam, even though the mitzvah is on the populace, you have to do it only through the king, and with that we can comprehend why he writes that it's an obligation of the populace, and he also mentions the king. He means that it's an obligation that the populace work with the king's commands. Now, the wars of Beis Dovid, he explains, and that's the Sefer, the wars of Beis Dovid explains, according to the Shiurim, that the mitzvah is upon the king. It doesn't mean to uproot the obligation from the populace, but rather it comes to disagree with the chinuch who write that the mitzvah is on every individual. Thus we see that the obligation, it depends. The Shiurim is opinions like the Rambam. It's an obligation of the king and the populace. And the populace has to abide by what the king says. Or the king has to force them to go out to war. Even according to the chinuch, on the individual, there's a mitzvah destroying Amalek, that if he should happen to come across somebody who's from Amalek, he has to kill him. But it's not the same as the obligation on the king and on the populace. That their obligation is to go out to war, Melochim Amalek, that the individual is obligated only when he finds in his hands somebody who's from the seed of Amalek. He doesn't have to go out to find them. This basis is found in the Griz of Rizk, who says that the Minchas Chinuch questions on the Chinuch that everyone who finds one of the 7 nations, he has to kill him when he's not in danger of his own life. That's by every Melochim, there's always a danger, and you're obligated to go out. So what's the difference of the 7 nations war? And the Griz explains, as it's written, Zvulun, that the obligation is to put yourself in jeopardy only when the king and the populace go out to wage war. But an individual is not obligated to wage war. He's not commanded to kill when there's a question of possible death. Therefore, there's 3 types of obligations. 1 to wage war, 1 to destroy completely, and 1 to kill. According to the chinuch, war is upon the king and the populace. But the mitzvah of the yochid is only to destroy, not to wage war. And it brings proof from Halacha Daled that only by the 7 nations is there an obligation of an individual to destroy, but there's no obligation on an individual to kill anyone from Amalek. It's an obligation of the congregation and the king. And the king is the one who has to lead them in the war. When is this time of obligation? To destroy Amalek. It would seem it's continuous, but the Maimonides cites from Sefer HaMitzvahs that it doesn't it's not in effect till Mashiach will come, and after we conquer Eretz Yisrael and have it back in our hands. And as it says, when a God will leave you at peace from all of your other enemies in the land which God shall give to you as an inheritance to inherit, then you shall destroy Amalek. But that's only after we conquer Israel, and then we will have that actuality from all of your enemies from around. Then we're obligated to destroy Amalek. The advanced questions that Shmuel commanded the Shaul to fight with Amalek, we see that it takes effect even before Mashiach comes. In the explanation of Isaac Stein, one of the early commentaries, he questions, we find that when we had to build Beis HaMikdash is only after the Amalek is destroyed, and here it seems in Sanhedrin that in the days of David, it was already a time when we were at rest from our enemies. Because it says, David said to Noson, I sit in a house of cedar. Now, if the commandment is only after the destruction of Amalek, and that's only when Mashiach will come, why was he obligated to build a Beis HaMikdash? And he tells us that David HaMelech killed all of Bnei Amalek that lived in Eretz Yisrael, not other nations. That's the intent of the Smag. The Maria's called their Amalek will be only in the time of Mashiach. The Kundas Chidushim understood also the Smag that it doesn't take effect until Mashiach comes, because you cannot destroy Zeich Amalek only for a king like Mashiach that will reign over the entire world and rectify the world to serve Hashem. And the intent of the Smag is after the conquering of the world, not just Eretz Yisrael. Otherwise, you can't destroy all of Amalek, because even if you destroy them in one country, they'll go to another country. The Chinuch writes that David HaMelech destroyed all of it, and there was nothing left, only a small number that were dispersed among the nations of the world, and we do not have the ability to destroy it, to kill them. So it would seem that this concurs with the Isaac Stein, that David HaMelech killed only the Amalek that lives in Eretz Yisrael, but not in other nations, and that will only occur when Mashiach comes. There's no contradiction between the words of the Rambam that it's obligatory throughout the generations and every time, any moment. Now, the Kiyah Sefer the Mabit says something which is we have to think about. He understood that according to the Rambam, the mitzvah takes effect, is only in effect when Mashiach comes, after we conquer, after Mashiach conquers the world. Then you destroy Amalek, as it says, destroy Amalek. And it says before that, when God will give you rest from all your enemies, then you shall destroy. So how do the two jive together? That when you're at rest, you have to destroy, and you have to wait only when you conquer the entire world? And we can answer that the Mabit does not discuss primarily the opinion of the Rambam, only whether he's discussing whether it's the Raisa, obligatory from the Torah, the Rabbanon. The Kiyah Sefer explains that the Rambam, the opinion of the Rambam, and he says, like in here, he infers that the Rambam opinions just like the Smag, but he doesn't mean to say that is the entire opinion of the Rambam. Hamarche Lev explained that Mashiach ben Yosef will wage war against Amalek. He will destroy Zeich Amalek, but the seed of Esav will only fall. That's because the seed of Esav can only fall into the hands of the seed of Rachel, and that refers to Yosef. That's why there's Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben David will be able to conquer the entire world to believe in Hashem. The Chassam Sofer argues that Shaul, he merited to be the king, was for this reason, in order to destroy Amalek, because Shaul was from Binyamin, it was also the seed of Rochel. And since he did not destroy them, therefore the kingdom went over to the household of David. So, as it says, because it says that there shall always be a ruler from Judah, and gracious by Yaakov Avinu's bracha. Similar to the words of the Machon Nesher, that when Mashiach ben Yosef will first wage war to destroy Amalek, even though the kingdom will ultimately remain in the hands of Beis David. The Rambam, Maimonides, explains that the waging war against Amalek was the first war that Klal Yisrael waged, and it's going to be the last war as well, because Amalek is from the seed of Esav, and that's who started wars against us to begin with, and that caused ultimately the destruction, because the kingdom of Edom destroyed our Beis HaMikdash when the Romans destroyed it, and when we will be successful, he and many nations which were with him we will be saved from them forever, as we find in the Novi Avadia, all Mashiach Baal Tzion, and saviors shall come up in the mountains of Tzion, Nishpot es Esav, to judge the mountain of Esav, and God will reign supreme over the world. And all that Moshe Yeshua did with them to begin with, Eliyahu Mashiach ben Yosef will do to the seed of Amalek, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was very urgent to do so, as we find Eliyahu will fight with the seed of Amalek in the days of Melochim Moshiach. Melochim Perek Hey Halacha Hey. In the Loshen Rambam, the Maimonides says in Bereshis 36:12 that it would seem the obligation is to destroy Amalek and not the other seed of Esav, and this contradicts his words that in the final exile there will be a war with Edom, which is in the same family as Amalek. So he seems to equate all of the seed of Esav with that of Amalek. The Ner Mitzvah cites the Smag, who writes that the obligation to destroy Amalek is only in the future, because in the exile it's impossible to accomplish this. Therefore, he says till Mashiach will come. Like we find in Subis 1:11, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Israel take an oath that they will not rebel against the nations of the world when they're in exile. And with that we answered the question of the Radbaz, because Shmuel commanded Shaul to destroy Amalek when the kingdom was in the hands of Israel. And the question of Isaac Stein, we find that the Smag is the opinion that the obligation of Amalek is always when there's a possibility of doing so. But in the exile, it's forbidden for us to tease or tempt the nations, and the Toy Afo Yisrael explains that the opinion of the Yereim is that since the eradication of Amalek is an obligation of the king, therefore it can't be till Mashiach comes when we have a king. The Ner Mitzvah explains that since the Amalekim are not found in their place, as we know in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, mixed them among all the nations, and even the Egyptians in Mitzrayim are not Egyptians, and Edom is not Edom, and therefore it's forbidden to us to attack those who are non-Amalekim, and therefore we go according to the majority, and therefore the Ner Mitzvah explains that according to the Smag, you can't accomplish today the destruction of Amalek, because we don't know who is Amalek. When Mashiach will come and tell us who is Amalek, we'll be able to accomplish it, like we find in Mechilta on the Posuk in Dvorim, Binu Shnois Dovadora, and is to comprehend every generation. But as it says, 3 generations in the generation of Mashiach, because we find, I will see you in with the sun, and before the moon, generation after generation. And if Lois B'Teyosecha adds a interesting suggestion that the words Im Shemesh, with the sun, and before the moon, the last words, letters are Moshiach. Im, Mem, Shemesh, Shin, Lifnei, before Yereach is Yud, is Ches, Mashiach. The Melech questions how will we be able to accomplish the destruction of Amalek when Mashiach comes, since all the nations have been intermarried. How will know who it is? Because you usually go according to the majority. That's a Halacha. Mashiach will tell us who it is in order to accomplish it. We can also answer that the Smag, in the same fashion, that's the opinion of the Smag. But the words of the Rambam are a bit bewildering. In Halacha Daled, in the midst of to destroy, to eradicate the 7 nations, he writes, they and their memories, because since Sanchev confused all the nations together, and by Amalek, he doesn't mention that they are lost. So why doesn't he mention it by Amalek, just like he mentions it by the 7 nations? The Rae Gann cites the Magid Mishnah in the name of the Ramban of Maimonides, that even today, somebody who lives from the 7 nations is forbidden with a negative commandment, not to marry them. And he brings from the Bahag that on the 7 nations, it doesn't say the permission of Sanchev came and confused the nations. The Rae Gann goes into studying whether we say, since Sanchev confused the world, there's no longer the forbiddenness, even when we know a certain person is from a certain nation. Since the forbiddenness is in effect only on the nation, or is the effect even for the individual who is nullified amongst the many. The Rae Gann makes a differentiation between the forbiddenness on a nation, like Ammon and Moav, and when they were intermingled with the other nations, they were all permitted. And also, if it's known about a person that he's from that nation, he would be permitted, because when they were intermingled, they no longer have a name of a nation. But when the forbiddenness is on the individual of that nation, there you can't say they were intermingled, because at the very end he is known to be from that nation, and therefore he explains the Maimonides and the Bahag that the 7 nations remain in the forbiddenness because it's on every individual. Because it does not help that which they were intermingled, because every non-Jew is forbidden as an individual, not as part of the nation. By Amalek, it says Agog regarding Haman, and we understand why does the Mishnah say, the Megillah say that Haman was from the seed of Amalek, even though it was after the intermingling of the nations by Sanchev. We learn from this that we know for sure that one of the seed of Amalek is still obligatory regarding him, and you have to remove him. According to this, the Rae Gann explains the Rambam's opinion by the 7 nations is to destroy the nations, is only for the nations, and therefore he says after Sanhedrin intermingling of the world, there's no obligation. And that the Rambam opinions like the Magid Mishnah in the name of the Ramban and the Bahag, that Lois Chattenbaum, that even though it's mentioned by the 7 nations, it's on each individual, but destroy them is only on the entire nation. Only regarding the 7 nations it says destroy them, the nation. Therefore, the destruction of the eradication of Amalek is on every individual, not on the nation. He doesn't mention destroy them and eradicate their memory. He brings proof to his words from the Chuvas Mordechai that Mordechai said that the Jewish Mordechai says that the seed of the kingdom was not intermingled to that of Amalek, and therefore Haman, who came from Agag, was the seed of the king, which did not mix. Thus we see that one can differentiate, according to the Rambam, between the obligation of destroying the seed of Amalek to the individual and the 7 nations, because there it's to destroy, to eradicate the 7 nations, but not the individuals. And therefore, after Sanchev intermingled all the nations, there's still an obligation of destroying Amalek in the days of Mordechai and Esther, because the obligation of the Milchama is to destroy Amalek in individuals as well. As we find in the Targum of the Megillah, that all these 75,000 people that were killed in the war of Achashverosh, the 500 people that were killed in the first day in Shushan Abira, and the 300 that Esther asked that they be killed in the second day, all of were from Amalek. Also in Megillah, in the Masechta Megillah, it explains that there was the destruction of Amalek, and therefore by Amalek, Rambam doesn't mention that they were not destroyed after Sanchev intermingled nations, because there's still an obligation of destroying the individual Amalek. Now the Rambam, if we, whether we accept converts from the seed of Amalek or from the 7 nations, we'll see that in the Kesef Mishnah in Perek Vov Halacha Dalet. The Milchas Chinuch in Mitzvah 604 cites that Rashi on the Posuk you shall destroy, eradicate the memory of Amalek, in Devarim 25:19, cites that the obligation is like Shmuel said to Shaul. He should do it from man to woman, from anyway, that from infants and any animals, that it should be not, the name Amalek should not remain even on their animals, in order to keep the positive commandment of eradicating the memory of Amalek. Now, the Chinuch questions, where's the source of this Rashi? It's not in the Sifri, and you can't bring a proof from Shaul. Maybe that was a one-time prophetic obligation, but we don't know that that's what has to continue throughout the generations. The Rambam and the Chinuch don't mention it. The Milchas Chinuch is the opinion that the animals of Amalek is not an obligation throughout the generations. By Shmuel, it was just a one-time item. Editorial comment: according to the Ner Mitzvah, the Amalek in the time of Shaul and David was only against those that lived in Eretz Yisrael. We can understand why not to leave anything from their animals, because in Israel it is a different obligation. The later commentaries cite a source for Rashi in the Mechilta, the Medrash Echo, and it must be that the Rambam didn't bring the fact that the obligation of the animals is for generations, because he's the opinion that Shaul was only commanded to do so as by the prophet Shmuel as a one-time item regarding the animals. The Meshech Chochmah cites from the Chinuch that he's the opinion that the destruction of Amalek can destroy any commemoration there is even regarding individuals, and he cites from Shmuel that David and his people fought in Amalekim, and it says they took sheep and cattle, flocks and cattle. So we see that in the war against individuals of Amalek, there's no obligation to destroy their cattle, because David took them. But Shaul was commanded, that was his unique commandment. The Rambam doesn't say this, not in Sefer HaMitzvahs. He said that mitzvahs are saying to read in the Torah and Parashat Zohar. Only it's a positive commandment to remember continuously the evil deeds and the evil plans of Amalek, as it says, remember what Amalek did to you, and from this we learn remember with the mouth. In Hilchos Tefillah, he writes, you read Parashat Zohar on Shabbat Zohar as the obligation. Shulchan Aruch cites that there are those who say Parashat Zohar and Parashat Torah Aduma you have to read as something enacted by the rabbis or Moshe Rabbeinu, but rather as an obligation from the Torah, which the Berurah cites in Megillah, that the obligation of remembering is by speech from the Sefer, from the parchment Torah, and not just remembering in your heart. Therefore, the person who reads has to have intent to fulfill the obligation of those who are listening, because they're not reading from the Torah. The Emi Brocha explains that according to the Rambam, the reading of the Parsha is midrabanan. Therefore, he only mentions it in Tefillah, where Kriya Shema, and not in the Sefer HaMitzvos. And he adds, what we read Parashat Zohar and Odo, that's according to the order of the every Shabbos and Moed. It's not a specific commandment. According to the Rambam, you don't have to have intention to fulfill the obligation by the 4 parshas, because it's not even the rabbinical, but rather how they ordered the reading of the parshas. The Rambam, that the parshas Amalek is read in Sibur, would seem, the Maimonides is of the opinion, like the Tumas Hadeshin, according to Hagos Ashri, that the reading of Parashat Zohar in 10 is a commandment min Torah. The Ramban concludes it would seem correct that, like, do not forget what Amalek did to us until we eradicate his name, and tell this to our children afterwards, that this is what this evil nation did to us. Like it is like the Rambam, that it is to remember continuously his evil deeds and the plots that he intended to employ to destroy us. It's a positive commandment to remember his evil deeds. Thus, we see that the commandment is every day, as we find the Smag, and that's the opinion of the Charedim, in Moetzes Asay min Torah, which has to do with the mouth, to remember. Hanei Mitzvah says, from the Achronim, the name Chachmei Emes, you have to learn every day the 4 Zechiros. Remember your days when the day we left to Egypt. Remember when we stood before our Sinai. Remember what Amalek did to us, and remember what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did to Miriam. There are those who read 2 others. Remember Shabbos, and also remember, do not forget what you angered Hashem in the Midbar. And these are the 6 that are found in the Sidurim. The one who says, remember what Amalek did to you, he remembers every day, and every moment. The Chinuch cites from the language to remember continuously, that it's continuous, not once a day. Like the Chinuch, that the 6 mitzvahs, the obligation is continuous. They should not stop from a person even for a moment. Every moment, they should think of the completion of fulfilling this positive commandment. According to Mil's Chinuch, the Rambam's language of Tomid, continuously, means also the obligation to remember what Amalek did to us. The Rambam counts 60 mitzvahs that a person has to do at every place and every time and every situation. And the Nehemiah Mitzvah questions, why didn't he count that which we should not forget what Amalek did? And he comes up with a novel idea that according to the Rambam, remembering what Amalek did to you does not take effect when we're in exile, because the mitzvah comes to arouse us to wage a war, like the Smag. And that during the exile, we cannot wage a war, and since it's not in effect in our times, therefore he doesn't mention it. But when it is in effect, it's a continuous mitzvah, like the Minchas Chinuch writes. Megillah Yudches Amud Aleph 18a is brought down that we have a Zerushavas Chiro to remember. It says in Esther these days are remembered, and it says by Amalek, remember these days in a sefer. Just there, it's in a sefer. Here too, it's in a sefer. That's how we know that we could write Megillas Esther. The Rosh Yosef infers that the mitzvah to remember the actions of Amalek in every day from a sefer. We don't do that. He says that the Magen Avraham in Orach Chaim 60 cites from the Ari when he says, "You have brought us close to your great name," in the blessing that said before the morning Shema and Ava Rabbo, you should have in there the intent regarding Amalek. And somebody who doesn't say it from a sefer, even with thought and contemplation itself, he accomplishes. Remember, the is only after destruction of Amalek, because the entire time that Amalek is in the world, Hashem is not Sholem, and he says Sholem. Shem HaGodol, we have intent to destroy Amalek, that then it will be complete, as we find in Toysus and Brochus Gimel 3a, and that's what you have to say by Yehi Shmei Rabbo, that the name of Yud Kei should become to Yud Kei Vov Kei, because the name of Hashem is not complete until Amalek is destroyed. The Charedim cite that there are congregations that had a custom before they said Omen Yehi Shmei Rabbo, they would say Yod al Keis Ko Melchom al Hashem ba'Amalek. To mention Ki Yod al Keis Ko, talking about Yud Kei is what the war is about. That the intent is, like we said before, as it says in the Machzor Vitri, Yehi Shem Ko Rabo. Yehi Shmei means Yehi Shem Ko Rabo. It should become larger, greater. Yud Kei to Yud Kei Vov Kei. And when we say the Shimcha HaGodol, you have to remember the obligation to destroy Amalek. In our times, we don't mention every day from a sefer, because the ongoing mitzvah is only to say it with the mouth and say those things which arouse us to have this hatred of Amalek. They shouldn't be forgotten. Many of the later commentaries point out that there are those who explain the language of the smag, that every moment one has to remember the actions of Amalek. It doesn't mean every moment or every day. They shouldn't be forgotten. As the Rambam says, that every moment persons should be awakened, aroused to fight off Amalek and hate him. So the mitzvah will not be forgotten, and it will not become weaker, the hatred. And thus we see that the mitzvah depends upon the level of the person. When a person feels that he's forgetting it, he has to remind himself with the mouth. He says these things that awaken him, and they're not a continuous mitzvah. We can understand the question of the Ner Mitzvah, why the Rambam didn't count it among the mitzvahs that are continuous. And furthermore, we can answer that he only counts those mitzvahs that you can accomplish them continuously. The Trumas Hadeshen, the Ramban, and other Rishonim have the opinion that the reading of Parashat Zocher is an obligation, not Torah, and you have to read it with 10 people. But the Rambam doesn't seem to say that, and therefore we say in the 6 things that we remember every day, that of Zochai Shashosel HaMolek, and also we have Tonal Shem HaGodol. We should remember the eradication of Amalek. The Chinuch says that somebody who never remembers the action of Amalek, he transgresses this part of the commandment and he nullified it. The Mechel infers that it could be that you can accomplish it one time in your life, you don't have to do it continuously. The Chinuch is of the opinion, mitzvah 603, that it's only for males, because the mitzvah to remember is in order to fight them, and men fight and not women. And he rejects the proof because there the Rambam says it's known that women do not judge and do not say witness, they don't bring a korban, they don't go out to the war. See, the Ner Mitzvah says that the Rambam is of the opinion that Zohar is only obligation of women, because there it says what women are not obligated. In the Zohar, in Loisishkach, he doesn't write that women are not obligated, and he rejects this proof. Here he's saying that we know women do not judge, do not say witness, they don't bring offerings themselves, they don't go out to war of rishus, and anything that has to do with bezin, witnesses, or bringing offerings of war of choice, women are not obligated, because this is an extra, and it's actually they don't have an obligation. Therefore, maybe he didn't mention it by remember what Amalek did to you, because women are not able to go out to war. But the Ner Mitzvah then changes his mind, since the Rambam Sefer Mitzvah writes that they only go out, they don't have to wage war by a war of choice, but when it comes to an obligation, they do go out, even like in Soita. Okay, and like we find the Hilchos Melochim, the Melchemes Amalek is a Melchemes Mitzvah, and therefore, just like a Kala would have to leave her wedding abode, so too women are obligated. They have to remember as well. Regarding the Chinuch that women are potter, are not obligated, the Mechel Chinuch says it would seem that they are not obligated because also from do not forget, and he argues without a proof that they're potter, because there's a rule that women are only obligated in a mitzvah say that doesn't have to do with time, and there's also a negative commandment that they have to keep, and therefore they should be obligated because this is timeless. And furthermore, they do go out from Melchemes Mitzvah, and Amalek is a war of command, not of choice. And he argues further, we shouldn't say that women are not obligated, because who knows if the reason is because of revenge. Maybe it's a dictate of the Pasuk that says we have to remember his hatred even without reason, and women are obligated in this as well. The Gemara cites that Rabbi Lezer freed one of his slaves in order to have a minion. The Gemara asks a question: there's an obligation of always having them be your slave, Lo'elam b'hem ta'avodu, and Vayikra 25:46, and the Rosh says you can do so because if you need it for the minion of Zohar, which is an obligatory reading of the Torah, according to the Rosh. Shuz B'nai Tzion questions if women are obligated, then an Eved Kanani is also obligated, and you can use them as part of the minion without to free them. We have to say that women are not obligation. Later commentaries reject this as well, that we learn that we need 10 from this Nigdashti B'Zech B'nai Yisrael should be sanctified, that for minion need Yisraelim. And even though avodim are obligated, they cannot be counted as part of the minyan. In our times, the custom is that women come to the Beit HaKnesset to hear Parshas Zohar. In the Minogi of Sam Sefer, it's brought down to the Goyim Nosson Adler was very careful to make sure that women should hear Parshas Zohar. The Chinuch adds that after Mashiach Godol will come and Amalek will be destroyed, eradicated, right? It could be that Zohar will be a continuous mitzvah. Who knows the secrets of Hashem, and who says the reason is to arouse war. Maybe it's a separate idea having something to do with the makeup of a human being, and it will be in place even after Mashiach comes. Like the Maimonides says, is the Chan Amalek mitara shmayo. That even in the days of Mashiach will not be forgotten, and the eradication of the memory of Amalek will be even in the time of Mashiach. And we find also the time Shmuel says to have a memory Yagiach Kravo b'debeis Amalek v'yishatzi yasoin l'tilta Dario Medora de Almo Deina Medora de Mashiach Medora de Almo de Osi, that the eradication of Amalek will take place in 3 worlds, so as to speak. They were in our times, when the world is in the natural order, and when Mashiach comes, and when there will be the ultimate Olam Habo. Mashiach will destroy them, and then there'll be the time, the eschatological age, the time when everyone will have faith in Hashem, and still there'll be an obligation. The Maram Shik points out, how do I know that Zohar is only in a Sefer Torah, it's kosher? We find there are other mitzvahs to remember, but doesn't say you have to read it from a Sefer Torah, and he answers that's because that those things that were said in writing, you can't say it without reading it. The Prima Godol says that according to those who say Parshas Zohar is an obligation to read from the Torah, you have to read from a Sefer Torah kosher. And after the Kriya it was found to be non-kosher, you have to bring another Sefer Torah and read it again. The Ramshik cites Megillah 18. You can't read a Megillah Esther Baal Peh. We were commanded by the action of Amalek, write this Kohen Sefer. We learn from there with Exer Shova. It has to be that you have to read from a Sefer. These days are remembered. He argues from here we see that for Zohar you need to read from a Sefer, because then how do I know that the destruction of Amalek needs a Sefer? With the Ramban, that from here we see that here's why Amalek needs a Sefer. But the Ramban has questions whether you need to read from Parshas Zohar in Tzibur and from a Sefer. The Rambam says on mitzvah, part of commandment 189 writes that we are commanded to remember in order to awaken with ourselves the obligation to fight him. The Ramshik infers from that's the reason for the mitzvah of remembering in the Tzibur, because it is to wage war. And just like war is on the congregation, therefore the mitzvah of remembering has to be in the congregation. If they didn't hear it in the congregation, you didn't accomplish what you're supposed to accomplish. And he adds further that Zohar and Amalek were brought together to teach you that just like the eradication of Amalek in the war, it has to do with the congregation, so too the remembrance has to be together, meaning like the Rambam, the Nachmanides. And we understand the words of the Rosh that the Parshas Zohar, you need 10 people. Maham Shik makes us aware that reading Zohar B'Tzibur is only once in a year, because we find that something that's lost is forgotten after a year. And by a dead person, it also says there's an edict that was given out that a person should forget the hurt in his heart after a year. And here it says, do not forget, therefore, once a year you have to read it. And he brings the question of Moshe Meir says, what do you do when there's a leap year? It's more than 12 months. Does it mean thereby it says after 12 months? It's forgotten. And so too by Aved it says 12 months. Sam Soifer answered that in the leap year, he himself would, when he reads the Parashat Kiseitze, he has in mind that because of the 12 months, he should have another period of time. The Ramshik is of the opinion that that's what somebody should do, because there will be 13 months between the readings that take place only for Zohar. So when they read the Torah, you have to remember it. In Megillah, it's brought down that Yisrael, they finished the order of the Parshas with reading the Torah once in 3 years. Therefore, in the middle of the year, they didn't have any commemoration, because they didn't read Parshas Amalek, that's in Parshas B'Shalach, and not Parshas Zohar, that's in Parshas Kiseitze. They must have read Zohar by itself, and when the middle year was a Uberes, they transgressed on do not forget. But some Soifer argues that the year is the time, not 12 months, and therefore, even in a leap year, you won't forget. It brings further from the Shvus Yaakov questions, how could it be that in a regular year a person will forget after 12 months, and in a leap year only after 13 months? How does that work? And the answer is, according to the early commentaries, that there's a concept of the entirety of the year, and there's days of happiness, days of fasting, other activities, and every day awakens a certain concept that the year is not over. When it goes by, then he forgets about it. Mamshik also points out that he heard from the Chassam Sofer, because since we're not sure, then you should have in mind that 12 months should not go by without having remembered Amalek, that we have to destroy him, eradicate him, and ultimately Hashem will do it for us in the time of Mashiach.